Hey, it's Brian Gray. Some of you call me Big Bri or whatever you call me. Doesn't really matter. It's not about me today. But I do some interviews to call it Big Bri No Holds Barred because I generally take on topics and personalities that are not your standard personalities that everyone talks to and that give you the common lip service of the industry. We just talk. And it is what it is. It's hobby. It's a hobby we love. It's a hobby I love. I've done it my whole life. But I am the most honored I've ever been in the industry because I have a chance today to talk to someone who, again, I haven't even asked him when the last time he did an interview was, but it has to have been a decade plus in this format, maybe 2 decades. Because again, some people are so big in the hobby and so important, but a new generation doesn't know or understand them or misunderstands them. So today, I'm talking to someone that I actually look up to as not only are they a friend of mine, but I look up to them as a hero. Not because they're perfect, but because the things they contributed to this hobby were so substantial and so epic that it's a real disservice to us as collectors not to listen when someone is willing to share their story, and maybe in this case, the most important story in the history of trading cards. So anyway, I would like to bring on my friend and one of the most well-known figures in the hobby, whichever side you look at it, Bill Mastro.
Hey, Brian, you're a little over the top on the introduction there, buddy.
But see, if you know me, and you do.
I do, yes.
There's only one speed, and that's over the top.
Yeah.
That's how we do it.
I thought it was just so neat that we met only a few years ago. I'd heard about you. I knew you were a client in our auctions, but to meet and we had an instant connection. You know, I'm really grateful that you care enough about me that you want me to be in an interview with you.
Well, no, you know what it is? I'm a historian of the hobby. For a young guy, I mean, I'm not young. I actually just turned 51, 52. I just turned 52. Yeah, 52 I just turned. I forget at this old age. But I just turned 52. But I started doing this when I was 16. I was doing shows all over the country at 16. So, like, I remember the good old days. And not a lot of people today who are dealers or in the industry in an active way really were around or know what the hobby was like before the first boom. Like, we think COVID was the boom. That was nothing. The first boom was before me. You know, back in like Atlantic City, like those old First Nationals, that was the first little boom. I was around for the big boom that was also a bust. And then, you know, we've seen so much water under the bridge since. But like being around in those old days made me interested in the hobby and its foundations and the people who not only the stories of the hobby, but the people who molded them and created the stories for us to talk about. And then honestly, in your case, you know, we've talked for a while about talking together about this in a public forum. And it's like the greatest story never told by the source in the history of this industry is the card. And we're going to say that because that's not the only thing I want to talk to you about. So first, I think I would really like for people to understand and get to know the Bill Mastro that I know that predates the core topic that every person tuning in wants to hear you talk about. We're going to put that second because I think it's important to understand the scope and where we come from and the background to who you are in the hobby, how you got into it, what you are, you know, your whole story, basically your story in a reasonable nutshell, your story, to kind of give people perspective on how you evolved into the point to where we get to the story that everyone wants to hear.
Okay. So I grew up in New Jersey, and in 1960, I bought my first cards. I was I'll be 72 years old in December.
You don't look a day over 65.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I have a hat on, so you can't see that I have no hair.
Smart man.
I sure wish I had hair like you. I've always.
Oh yeah, so my hair is so sexy. Woo.
Well, hey, listen, it's better than no hair. So I grew up in New Jersey, and you know, I was you know, but when you say New Jersey, people think of like the armpit of New York. You know, it was. I grew up in a very rural area. And there was a little country store that sold groceries. And my mother would give me a quarter, and I would walk down to Geroliman's, a little tiny grocery store, and I would buy penny candy, a soda, popsicle. That was when they had 2 sticks instead of 1, and maybe a pack of cards. My first cards, surprisingly enough, were football cards, and I was gluttonous. I spent the whole quarter and bought 5 packs of football cards. Opened them up, had no clue who any of the players were.
That's funny.
Brought them home in the little paper bag, and my mother went berserk because her attitude was, what a waste of money. I gave you a quarter. You spent it all on this garbage, and you didn't even bring any money home.
By the way, who are you looking for in those football packs? Because
I had no idea. I didn't know what was in there.
There were no football players you liked.
The only name I knew, I know this sounds crazy, was, for some reason I thought it was a cool name, was Hopalong Cassidy. Okay, and he was in.
We're buying basically. What was this? What year product was this?
I was 8 years old.
Oh, you were 8.
Yeah, 8 years old. It was 1960. I was born in 52.
So you should have been pulling Jim Brown rookies.
Well,
instead you're looking for Hopalong or
I didn't,
Crazy Legs or whoever.
I had no idea what I was buying. Okay, I thought it looked neat. I think I've had collecting blood in my body since I was born. You know as well as I do, there's something about us that is different than the other guy. If we had tails, our tails would be wagging every time we saw it. Look, every time we see a collectible, I like collectibles in general. You could put me in a room full of old trains. You could put me in a room full of toys. I love collecting stuff, okay? But it just so happened that baseball cards became my thing, okay? And I started, right after that, I started collecting I would say, here's what I used to do. I had a little wagon, and on my way down to Drolleman's, I would save bottles. I would pick up all the empty bottles along the road. You'd get a nickel for each one. That was 1 pack of cards.
That's huge.
I lived, they were a nickel. They weren't a penny. And so I dragged my wagon full of bottles down to Drolleman's. And of course, he was I remember him as kind of a curmudgeonal guy, and then I could buy baseball cards with my own money. And here's the interesting thing. I grew up in kind of I always thought it was a normal household, but my mother, the punishment for me whenever I was rotten or whatever was wrong with me as a kid was, okay, bring all your baseball cards down. We're throwing them away. That was my punishment, starting in like 1960. Right. And that went on until about maybe 64 or so. 4 years of just, throwing them away. And of course, late at night, 1 in, I go down and fish a whole bunch of my favorites out of the garbage, and keep them, and that had nothing to do with money. I mean, it was just, I just loved them. And I was filling my drawers, no clothes in my drawers. My drawers were emptying slowly but surely of my clothes. My clothes were on top of the dressers, and my drawers were just filled with baseball cards. So 1965, I don't know how many thousands and thousands and thousands of cards I bought. If you remember, cards were issued in series. So you'd start buying them in the springtime, but by the fall, there was a 7th series. And if your store didn't get them, you were never going to complete that set.
Oh yeah, no way.
I mean, it was just such a pain in the butt. And you'd go to the store over. Yeah, sure, you wanted Mickey Mantle, but you also, if you were like me, you had the checklists in the cards, and you could see who you needed. Okay, and so I got into the fall, and there were no more cards for the 7th series in the stores, and I needed one lousy card to complete my 65 top set. One lousy card. Bob Schmidt, the 3rd string catcher of the Yankees. And I'm telling you, it was over. Now it's over. And I'm sitting there. I used to read when I was a kid the sporting news, and religiously, it came out every week. And I'd open it up. That was the news for me. And I'd read about all the players. And back then, I would write to people. I wrote to Herman Franks. I wrote to all these guys. about, what they should do with their team as a kid. Here I am.
Great.
Well,
Love the
I'm
game.
12 years old. I'm writing letters to managers of baseball teams.
I'm sure they just said, "Oh, this kid knows."
Oh, yeah, this kid knows what he's talking about. But in the back of the Sporting News, there was a column. I think it was like the next to last page. And I think it was like called the Sports Corner or something. And it listed like 6 or 8 guys that had catalogs. And there was Larry Fritsch. There was Bill Pine in Farmington, Michigan. There was Woody Gelman had a
Oh, wow. Okay.
the Card Collectors Company. A lot of people don't remember the Card Collectors Company, but that was Woody Gelman's company. Okay. Bruce Yecko had wholesale cards. All these guys listed their stuff. Jack Smalling had his autograph address list in there. So you could order these things. Well, I'm looking and here I am. It's over. 1965 is over. I'm missing a card. I order their catalogs. They send me the catalogs. I am like, oh my gosh, these guys, their stuff. Like I'm like Bowman's. I never saw a Bowman. And I'm looking tobacco cards made in 1910. So a great sidebar.
You know what's funny is that's like the first time people probably saw color television. Like, it's like Wizard of Oz when everything goes from black and white to color. Like your eyes are open to a world that would change forever. The minute you saw things that didn't exist. And it's a defining moment. And I love that you still remember all the details.
Oh.
Because so often people look back at defining moments and they're very vague on the memories.
No, like it was yesterday.
Never should forget.
Like it was yesterday. And of course, I was able to put a nickel, tape it to an envelope, and get my Bob Schmidt card. But this is kind of an interesting sidebar because I always remember it like it was yesterday. I remember in Woody Gelman's catalog. Now, I didn't know who Woody Gelman was, but his little catalog was maybe about this big. It was like the size of a TV guide, but very thin, maybe 12 pages. And at the bottom in one of the pages, it said 1909 T206 baseball cards. Okay. And it said, your choice of player, a quarter. My choice, meaning he would pick whatever he wanted, 15 cents. So I taped my quarter to a piece of cardboard. This was, I want to say it was late 65 or early 66. I taped my quarter to a piece of cardboard, and I wrote Woody Gelman a long letter about how I wanted Ty Cobb. Okay. Now, listen, I know you said my choice, and I'm choosing for my quarter, I want Ty Cobb. But if you don't have Ty Cobb, I would take Christy Mathewson or Walter Johnson. But I really want Ty Cobb. And I went on and on.
You have great taste, by the way, too. You're picking the greatest pitchers of those generations.
I mean, I'm writing a letter to an adult who owns a
now, what'd you get? I got to hear this. What'd you get?
The envelope comes. Now, you knew it was from the Card Collectors Company weeks later. Okay, this is what I hated about the hobby back then.
Oh yeah.
Everything was by mail, and everything took weeks. And I'm an instant gratification guy.
Oh yeah.
You know how we are. We're all OCD. I got to know right now. Okay, and the envelope comes, and up in the corner, you could always tell the Card Collectors Company because he had which is typical for Gelman. He had an artwork of a guy sitting at a desk, hunched over a lamp, looking at his cards. Okay, it was an artwork, a drawing. So I knew that was it. And I go, oh my gosh, my card is coming. I remember sitting there at the dining room table, and my mom and dad were both over my shoulder. And I said, this is it. This is it. And I opened it up, and there was Ty Cobb. It was the batting yellow background T206. And it was in nice shape. I mean, it wasn't mint, but it was beautiful.
Probably X or VGX, and that was probably good.
And that was the end of my mother ever throwing my baseball cards out again. She goes, oh my gosh, that's incredible. And of course, then at that point, I fell in love with the idea of collecting old things because it was all brand new. I mean, everything was brand new. I had never seen a play ball or a Gowdy or an old Judge. It was all brand new. Let me tell you, when I went to the first Detroit convention, okay, And they brought, that was, I think, 70 or 71.
Wow.
And they brought all these collectors from all over the country. And of course, everybody brought, I mean, Eric Lang brought dandies from Cleveland. The guys from California, like Ray Hess, brought Bell brands and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
None of us guys knew what any of that stuff looked like. We were all like kids in a candy store. Okay. The room was filled with this stuff. I think I brought $800 with me, and it was gone in about the first hour of the convention.
Oh, sure.
It was incredible, you know.
But see, and again, it's like being at our age. I mean, I'll say our age because I'm getting closer to you every day. It feels like the times where you're a kid in a candy store were magical times, whether it was a true candy store or whether it was the hobby candy store.
Oh, yeah.
For me, that was in 1987 when people are buying new cards really, and it's just starting to pick up. And I'm realizing that no one collects football or basketball. And I thought it was unbelievable. No one collected football or basketball cards in that era. And I go buy star bags at Dr. Beckett's store. They had the star bags for $5 a bag. And so I buy Star Company bags. And I was like, how are people not buying basketball? I bought Bird Johnson's for $10. And then after I bought, HL was the guy that worked there. They had a box of Bird Johnson's. I bought like 5 of them. They were in a plastic box. I went in the next day, there were 5 more, and there were 12. So I bought those 5, and I went in the next day, and they were 15. And I bought those. A week later, they put 5 more out, they were 20. The next time I went in, they were 50. And the game was over. I wasn't buying anymore. But the point was, it was just so – I had no idea that football and basketball cards were out there, really, because I'd only been heard about baseball cards whenever I was exposed to it. But my eyes opened like yours, and I was like, there's things here. And then Wayne Grove was there, and I learned about non-sports because he was a non-sports machine.
Sure.
And I didn't know 1983 Leave It to Beaver was incredibly scarce. And so these hobby icons were telling me, you realize they didn't make any of this. And that was at a time where cards were kind of overprinted, whatever still. You know, they were printing plenty. And it's just like you learn from all these people and your eyes keep getting opened and opened and open. And the new collectors have something to learn from you because if they look past the slabbed cards that they're buying on eBay now, because they only know the last 10 years, a lot of them, there's a world of cards out there that no matter what your reason for being in the hobby is, they're magical or cool. Whether it's as a hobby, whether it's you're a baseball nut, or whether even if you're just investing with value in mind or speculating with value in mind, there's a world of value to unlock once you look past the last 5 years and recency bias. There's a world to unlock. And you unlock that as a young guy.
Yeah, but this stuff wasn't, Brian, this stuff wasn't worth anything. There was no value. To pay 25 cents for a baseball card was kind of semi-ridiculous. I mean, you know, and I remember through the 60s and even in the early 70s, if you told people you were a baseball card collector, they looked at you like you had 3 heads, like there was something wrong with you. And quite frankly, I'm sure you met some of the hobby pioneers. You know, most of them were very socially inept. They were homebodies. I joke with people. They wore their pants up just under their nipples with pocket.
Oh, there's a lot of those out there. No,
you know, look, I some of those guys I really like a Frank Nagy. I mean, he was my mentor.
Oh, yeah, I know.
I loved him. Absolutely loved him. The interesting thing is, like in the early 70s, you talked about the boom in the hobby. The boom. I think the first boom was the conventions when we all started to be able to come together.
That was big.
And meet each other and talk to each other and do deals right in front of each other. And you have to remember, still there were no price guides, and the stuff was it really wasn't a monetary thing. Everybody collected. That was a huge boom to the hobby. And here's another thing that's interesting about then. There were very few guys that cared about any kind of memorabilia. If somebody walked into a convention with uniforms or bats or press pins or programs, there were very few people in the room that even wanted this stuff.
Wow.
It didn't know what it was.
And that's what I'm fascinated by is I love that stuff, and it makes me want to wish I was there. Because again, it would have taken a lot of foresight to really start looking at those assets and incredible collectibles before most people looked at them. But that's pretty amazing. But you're right. Cards, you have to start somewhere. You crawl before you walk, before you run, before you sprint.
Well, I was a card guy. I was definitely, the thing that did it for me was cards. And then I think it was 66 or 67. I met a guy who a lot of hobbyists really, he doesn't get a lot of credit. but a guy named Fred Mackay from New Jersey, and he was going to Fairleigh Dickinson University, which was in New Jersey near my house. And he came over and we started palling around, and he opened my eyes to a lot of things in the hobby. And the people that I met over those, especially those early years. See, one of my crazy things was I found that there was a hobby, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And then I couldn't get enough of it. And of course, my whole life became the hobby, and I started contacting other hobbyists, other collectors, but I did it a little differently. I started using the telephone, okay, and they would I would call Buck Barker, I would call Frank Nagy, I would call these guys, and they go, "What are you doing? Why are you calling? It costs a fortune," and I didn't care what it cost because I wanted the stuff and I wanted it right now.
Isn't that crazy?
And my mother would leave the phone bill on my dinner plate, okay, with yellowed all my I was crazy. I was on the
and
phone.
you were probably happy to pay.
No, I didn't pay. No.
Oh, you didn't pay? Okay, good.
Hey, Brian, I'm a nice guy.
That's one thing you have in common with half
I wasn't going to spend a nickel on a phone call, okay?
Guess what? This hobby is littered with people in the past who didn't pay their bills either. So don't worry. You fit in perfectly in this hobby.
One day I came downstairs and the phone, it was the old rotary phone with the line going into the wall. There was nothing. My mother had cut the line, okay? And almost there was a little line coming out of the wall because she took the phone away. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that like you saw some of these things at this first regional show in Detroit in 70 or 72, whatever, 71, and you saw things you didn't know existed. Because, again, we didn't have the same level of communication. We did not have catalogs published like SCD where you could see it all in ads. You saw a little thing like, send me 25 cents and I'll send you my catalog, which was really just 3 pages photocopied, whatever it was. So like even then you probably didn't get to see it all. You just saw lists.
Well, yeah, all you saw in the catalogs was a little black and white.
Little type black and white listings.
And the first convention I ever went to was in '69 up at my dad drove me and Mackay up to Mike Ehrenstein's house. And if you know Mike Ehrenstein, TCMA, okay,
right, yeah.
Tom Collier, Mike Ehrenstein, they made cards together.
For sure.
Ehrenstein's uncle, Myron Ehrenstein, was an artist, and he used to draw all the cards, and they made card sets. And so I went to Ehrenstein's basement. Nobody wanted to sell anything. There were guys from all over the country. Guys from Pittsburgh, Blazina was there, Zimpelman was there. Dennis Gray drove all the way in from Michigan on his motorcycle and brought stuff. Bill Haber, the guy who used to write the backs of the Topps cards, he worked at Topps, he was there. Crawford Foxwell from Maryland. There were guys from all over the East Coast mostly, but even from other parts of the country. And they all had tons of cards. Nobody wanted to sell the kid any baseball cards because they don't want to sell them. They want to trade. What do you have to trade? Well, I'm 16 years old, 17 years old. I don't have anything to trade. I want to buy stuff. I bought a McGee error card from Dennis Gray in Michigan for $45. That was the extent of my ability to buy stuff. So the first that was more of a collector gathering. I think maybe the first real convention was in California, and that was a bigger ordeal. And then Detroit took place, and that really changed everything. I mean, that was in a hotel, and it was a full weekend.
Different bird. Well, let's talk about how you evolved from this. So you see these cards for the first time at a show, and I think a lot of people can relate to this because they go to these shows now. And yeah, there's 80% of stuff on tables is slab and rookie cards and 4.2K, 3.9K, 8.8K. Like it's become something very different. But you still see things you never see anywhere else. Cards that have been
I mean, I am not as much.
You become a player collector, a set collector, a type collector. Like where did your focus? I know you just wanted to gobble stuff up like the Cookie Monster because your eyes were open to something. But like, did you become a type collector? Were you like, I want to get one card of every set? Be able to see what all these sets were and enjoy the artistic side of it, but then I'm going to build all the core sets. Kind of what was your collecting goal? Because today, 95% of collectors are completely unfocused. They have no focus. They buy a card, and then 2 days later, they're like, I don't really want that card. I want a different card. Sell that card. Buy another card. It's like there's very few people are, and there are a lot of loyal fans like Ricky Henderson collectors are hardcore. There are certain player collectors that are very hardcore, but very few people today have focus like the names you're saying. These iconic hobby people, they had more focus and vision, and a lot of them were type guys. They wanted some of every type of card ever made. You know, there are a lot of guys like that. Where kind of was your focus once you saw your eyes open? There's too many cards to buy. You'll never have enough money to buy it all, and no one will sell it to you.
My focus was pre-war.
Okay.
Pre-war, and I really didn't care about, and then kind of with a secondary focus on regionals, because I always found regionals fascinating, that they made these hot dog cards and
whatever. Yeah. But here's my question for you, because this is a challenge collectors have today. When I talk to young collectors, and a lot of young collectors will write me letters and stuff, and they'll say, Brian, I saw all you've done in the hobby. I want to be like you when I grow up. And I'm like, you really don't want to be like me. That means you have to sacrifice all your family time to be successful. You don't want to do that. But I said, what you can do is start looking beyond the blinders that have been put on you by the hobby, which is the last 3 to 5 years worth of cards, and start thinking about the past. The number one objection I always get is, I never saw these guys play. And the fact is, even though there is some limited film of Mantle and Aaron and these things, it's very limited. And then you go back to pre-war. So as a collector, and you're going to go buy pre-war. So if you're going to go buy T cards, you're going to buy the Gaudies, you're going to buy play balls, whatever it is. You didn't see these guys play, a lot of them, right? I mean, you didn't see them play. So how did you make that leap to wanting to go buy a Rube Marquard T206 card when you clearly didn't see him play, or the Dutchman, Honus Wagner, or whoever? How did you make that leap to guys you never saw play? Or were you read so much?
It was the artistic beauty of the cards, the cardboard. Each card had a very unique, almost each one like a unique artwork. Obviously I was very drawn to the color issues. And I found them fascinating. Yeah, I never saw the guys play, but I mean, who doesn't know who Babe Ruth is? I didn't need to see Babe Ruth play to look. I never saw Abraham Lincoln as president of the United States. I mean, how could you not be drawn to things that are related to Abraham Lincoln? So I from the perspective, I always loved baseball as a kid. Absolutely obsessed with baseball. Scoring, watching all the time. I mean, I played baseball, loved baseball, but the cards took it to a whole new level. I think what I have is I have an eye, a very artistic eye. That's even my collecting today, because it's like you said. I mean, I'm 72 years old. I can't take it with me. So I'm not stupid. I'm not going out and spending $2 million on an item. I'm not leaving my family with a $2 million piece of cardboard. But a lot of the items I pick up today, if you came to my house, you would see tons of $100,000, $200,000 items that are just incredible looking little pieces of history. Okay.
They're aesthetically
designs. Why would people save baseballs and never open the box? Okay. Well, I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, when we bought a baseball mitt, okay, that thing was already broken in the car on the way home.
Yeah, we were all over that thing.
Okay. So if I see a mint condition Mickey Mantle store model glove and nobody's even crushed their hands into it and rubbed all the lettering off and everything, I think to myself, wow, that's really cool. How did that survive? Okay. And so I have tons of that kind of stuff that I think are remarkable survivors, but they're also visual. They're also visual. We are very visually motivated in our collecting. Okay. And cards, like I said, I just think each card is a little artwork, a mini artwork. And we're also complete. We're also people that like to complete things. So
sure, it is.
I was one of the very first maniacs about condition. Absolutely obsessed with condition. I think the very first maniac condition-wise in the hobby was a guy, a lot of people don't know his name, was Lionel Carter. Okay. I mean, he collected batter ups. I was a kid. He needed one batter up to complete his set. They were made in 1934. I had the card. You know, batter ups were perforated around the top. I had it, but it didn't have the top. I mailed it to him for free. I said, here, complete your set. He mailed it back.
But that's the thing of it. That's a love for being not only a completist, but you passion for the presentation,
Yeah.
looks. And again, this wasn't about he was going to professionally grade it. There was no plastic.
No, there was no grading. I don't want this in my collection.
He loved it.
I was mortified.
This is why I wanted to talk to you, because again, like my dad wasn't really in the picture that much, but I didn't have a dad telling me back in the day, I saw this or I saw that. And I think it's a lost piece of our lives. Our dad sitting down telling us about when they were kids. Like my kids were like the last generation I hear really that my kids sat and said, tell me what it's like when you were a kid. But a lot of kids don't do that anymore. All they care about is Instagram, video games, and whatever. Like they're worried about the future, not the past.
Yeah, but as your kids get older, they will be more.
They start to ask.
A little older, and they're very interested in what it was like when I was growing up.
But I think for your generation, taking the step back to collect, not just Ruth because he transcended sports, but all those other Hall of Famers. Some of that is storytelling and sharing the past was very different back then than it is today. And so I think that's why vintage was so much easier for your generation and barely my generation to grasp, because we'd heard stories and it became like part of the art was the storytelling. Because again, TV, radio just wasn't the same back then. You know, media wasn't the same, like the way we heard about these things. So it's just, I think that lost art is part of why a lot of new collectors can't get their arms around vintage, because it would require them to go get a book or go online and research that. There's so many more fun things to do than that, right? I really wish people would understand the magic that is and I'll even say pre-1970, but I really pre-war is like a different era of these guys paved the way for the sports that we love.
Yeah, but they, you know, I always do.
40s and 50s football, paved the way for football, which we love.
Even kids, I say, Troy Kinnunen from Mears.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, he brought his son to the convention, and his son walked up and he had the little metal box, you know, filled with
with cards,
all his new cards, you know, and stuff. And I talked to him about collecting, and I always tell people, I don't care what age you are, collect what you like. Don't make it just about the money, because if it's just about the money, you won't enjoy it the way you would enjoy it if you collect what you like, what you really like. You'll never regret maybe overpaying for something because you really like it, because it really gets your juices flowing. And that's kind of how I've always collected. It's always been, yes, the stuff is expensive. It starts to get very expensive as our tastes improve. But at the same time, I got news for you. I got an entire room of my house filled with stuff that just eye appeal wise is amazing. And I don't have a lot of $100,000 items in my collection anymore. And I still enjoy collecting. You know, we won't go into it, but I mean, you know, I had my share of legal problems, and it took me out of the hobby for almost more than a decade with everything that went on. And I kind of got away from the hobby, and I missed it. And so several years ago, I picked it up again. Now, I had sold my entire collection in 2010 to fund my my fight with the federal government.
For sure.
And so I went, you know, in about 7 years ago, it was like starting over again. Hey, I have a humongous collection again. Okay, it's a testament to insanity. Okay, and to the insatiable collector that I am, and that I think most of us are. You're insatiable. You're absolutely insatiable.
When I want something, I'll pay whatever it takes to get it, and I'll be relentless in my pursuit of it until I get it, because it means something to me and I have to have it. And I just don't care. And sometimes those things are silly things. Like I just bought, I don't know if you've seen the movie Draft Day with Kevin Costner.
Sure.
I bought the little Post-it note that he wrote, draft Vontaze Mack no matter what. because I'll remember that scene for the rest of my life.
Great.
I'll remember that scene for the rest of my life because
Great.
I remember this guy knew what the right thing to do was.
Yeah.
And no matter what the whole world said to him, and this is how I've lived my life kind of, I don't really care what the world says.
Yeah.
I'll march by the beat of my own drum and what I truly believe. And if I'm wrong, I'll suffer the consequences. But if I'm right, I will moonwalk around the room and dance like Michael Jackson and put on a show.
And that'll be
I knew I was right. And I think you're kind of the same.
I'd like to see that myself.
Minus the moonwalk, I bet you would do the same thing. So okay, let's finish the hobby resume. And again, I think it's for a different show to talk about your hiatus from the hobby. Let's focus on what you did in the hobby, because again, I'll make a few statements at the end of the show that people are gonna be like, "Holy crap, Brian just said that." But I think your resume is strong. Not only you're collecting, you were a collector before you were a business person. In this business, that happens a lot, but not like you, where you really invested you invested a long time in being a collector prior to the business side of things. So we know you built this incredible base as a collector, someone who's passionate, completist, perfectionist, eyes open like you just saw the Wizard of Oz turn from black and white to color. How did it become a business? And then what were the couple of steps in the business that took you through the greatest untold from the source story in the history of sports cards?
Well, as a collector, you're always picking up duplicates and other things that maybe are not priorities for you. And as things started to have more value, it made sense to so-called finance my hobby by selling things. And gradually over time, because my taste was getting to be more and more high end, I became a guy that was considered to be a go-to guy if you wanted the best. You wanted the most expensive, you wanted the best. And now I'm talking about before grading services. If you wanted to buy a Wagner card, maybe you should talk to Bill Mastro. If you wanted to buy a set of batter ups, maybe you should talk to Bill Mastro. If you're collecting this, talk to him. And so I really found that enjoyable. That I knew everyone. The hobby was much smaller too in the 70s. I mean, it was very easy to know all the really serious collectors. And like any other business, you don't get along with everybody. There were people who didn't like me. And there are people that wouldn't deal with me, but they deal with.
I wouldn't know how that feels because I'm universally loved.
But yeah, you are universally loved. And it's so nice that you have that you're so humble.
No, trust me, I'm not universally loved at all.
No one's ever accused me of a massive amount of humility.
My public opinion polls rival presidential candidates in the last 10 years. So
okay, so you're not that highly up.
I'm batting better than Wade Boggs. I'm hitting more than 30%. Certainly not batting like a high school outfielder, that's for sure. And then of course one of my when I sold him the Wagner card, Jim Copeland out in California, he became. This is not the card that we call the card; it's a
this
card.
This is the card, yes. Yes,
Oh,
I bought it in 1986. I know we're going to go back over this.
Yeah.
I bought it in 1986.
It predates all the things we know.
Yes, when
you sold Copeland the card,
and I had every intention of keeping it because I wanted it for me. I loved it, and yet all of a sudden, Greg Bouzino calls me up and says, "Hey, I got a guy in California. He'll pay $110,000 for that card," and I'm thinking, I mean, I know it sounds ridiculous, but $110,000, most entire people's collections weren't worth $110,000.
Staggering amounts of money.
Staggering amount of money, yeah. And so I flew out to California. I met him. He and I hit it off. He wanted to buy other things. I became his guy. I flew all over the country. I went to everything. And offered him just immense amounts of things. He had great taste. I never offered him things that were not in his realm of taste. And he built up one of the most magnificent collections in the country. Well, all of a sudden, in California, in San Luis Obispo, a baseball card shop owner named Rich Gove. You probably heard of him. He had an early shop. His dad was manning the shop one day. Someone got off the train, shot and killed his dad, and robbed the store. And Jim Copeland's wife became extremely paranoid that they had this huge, high-profile collection in their house that everyone knew about, and she wanted him to get rid of it.
Oh.
And I said, "Wow!" I said, Jim. We
spent years building this painstakingly
to build this thing. Here we are now, and now you want to get rid of it. I said, okay. I had a childhood friend at Sotheby's. His name was Robert Woolley. He's passed on now. He was a dear friend. And I went to Woolley because he'd always said to me, he said, Master William, if you ever come up with just the right collection, maybe Sotheby's would do it, And I'm like, yeah, right, Woolley, So I call Woolley. He flies out to California with me. He's a vice president at Sotheby's. By the way, Woolley is the one who coined the phrase "Holy Grail" for the Wagner.
I did not know that. That's awesome.
When he auctioned it off, he was the auctioneer the day that it was auctioned off at Sotheby's. He was in the box. And he said, "And now the Holy Grail." He had a British accent. He was great. It was incredible. And we went to Copeland's house and he said, "I love it. I want to do it at Sotheby's." And that was it. And that was in 1990. And I got the whole collection ready. I drove it across country to Sotheby's. I spent the entire year living out of the Mark Hotel in New York. And we did the first Sotheby's auction in 1991, which, of course, as we all know, is unbelievable because we were now out of the basements and we had arrived.
Respectable, like as an industry, kind of like the last 3 or 4 years, we've become mainstreamer.
It was incredible.
Yeah.
It was now this was the look. There were people doing some really great things. I mean, Josh Evans at Leland's was a wunderkind and did a phenomenal job with his auctions at Leland's. There were some other people trying to do things, but Sotheby's doing it. That's a completely different stratosphere. And of course it was. I mean, they sold, I don't know how, it was the #1 selling catalog in the history of Sotheby's when we did that catalog.
It legitimized a whole asset. I hate to call it asset class, but a whole group of collectibles are legitimized when a Sotheby's or one of these massive world-renowned auction houses put it on their platform, because it's joining the likes of art and wine and all these incredible collectibles that
everybody came from all over the country to view stuff. And they had all the attendants with in their Sotheby's outfits with their white gloves, and everybody had to sit and at tables and be personally assisted to look at things. And I mean, it was the day of the auction was a zoo. Okay, you couldn't even get in the building at Sotheby's. It was so crazy, and then it was like wow, this. I could see the handwriting on the wall. I mean, I'm going to be like a dinosaur. I'm going to be extinct. There's not going to be the same need for Bill Mastro to go buy it from you and sell it. There's going to be a real need for auctions. And I think I learned what needed to be done properly, because if you look at the old Sotheby's catalog, that first catalog, there's almost no write-ups.
The storytelling is a big part of why some of these assets are special. And we've forgotten that part. And we just said, it's like selling a house without saying how spacious it is and how the rooms are perfect for families. And again, painting a picture.
How about without pictures?
Goes into these cards.
How about without pictures? You got one picture in the catalog.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but in 1952 top set, and the only thing you pictured in the catalog is the Mickey Mantle card, and your write-up says that this set is excellent to mint. What does that mean?
Oh yeah, that's crazy.
So now when I looked at that catalog, and of course to me, color was so important. I remember Sotheby's telling me, because I said, I want the whole catalog in color. Are you crazy? I mean, we can't do that. We charge $250 a photo in color. and we charge $100 a photo in black and white. I said, so you're telling me you're not even going to picture a lot of the stuff? No, it's got to be pictured. Well, we can selectively picture some things in color. That's why if you look at that first catalog, only part of it is in color. What a small thinking. And they were charging Copeland for all this.
What's amazing is a lot of innovation is paved by the people you draft off of until you're ready to pass them. And until you're ready to see what they did.
I learned exactly what I liked in auctions
and what you did not
like. Yep. And so, you know, at the time I through that, well, I did the Sotheby's auctions for about 4 years. The last one I did in 94 was a no reserve auction. Okay. Everything in the auction had no reserve. Well, they went crazy. I mean, we had a Wagner card in there, no reserve, and they went crazy. You can't do that. We don't do that here at Sotheby's. Everything has a reserve. I said, well, I'm sorry. I mean, everything's got a reserve. Start it all off at $10. I don't care. Yeah, no, we can't do that. They went nuts. Okay. And we got into kind of a.
But what I've learned over time is you may get the same price. You may get a little more even starting at $10. But there's a different mentality with collectors when they know they're not bidding against a book. And that's a problem now is there are auction houses in certain states where the state allows the auction house to actively bid against you with a reserve. Not just be a reserve where if you don't bid 300,000, you don't get it. But if you bid 100, they can actually bid 110, which to me, a reserve should not be a bidder. A reserve should be a threshold. But there are actually auction houses that people buy in every day now that have numbers where they're actively bidding against you. And that to me, all this, we're teasing what could be a future show someday, but not today. But it just, there's a big opening that this created for you. And that we don't have to, you can have an incredible selection of assets and an incredible auction with things you've never seen before. You can be someone who turns the black and white screen to color for a lot of people, literally and figuratively, through the auction business. Clearly, you see this. Clearly, you say there's an opportunity, and you're like, "What? I got to do it." There's no doubt. Was it a no-brainer, or did you have to like go to the tank and say, "Am I nuts?"
Well, you remember the early auctions. I mean, did you ever go see how any of them worked? I mean, they were all manual.
Oh, so you had people around a table in a conference room, like taking calls constantly,
running back and forth to blackboards and.
Oh, and I was calling back. Am I still leading this one? Because I didn't want them to forget to call me back if it was something big. But if it was small, they didn't even call me back. It was like I had to keep checking to see if I was still winning.
Absolutely,
because like, 103, you're in the lead. Like 105, you're outbid, and it was like it was so archaic.
There was no online service. Okay,
but that shows the need that was there. That's why someone like you had to step up and try to take what was a little bit of an archaic system, and even though you'd still be archaic when you start to think about how we mainstream, normalize, improve, and make it something where it can be a really viable form. Because honestly, the best cards in the hobby are sold at auction now. The best cards in the hobby are not generally sold on eBay. They're not generally sold private sell, like true private without anybody's hand, like an auction house in the middle. The biggest, most glamorous cards in the hobby are all sold through auction houses. The most glamorous memorabilia, most of the time, trades in an auction format. So clearly, being a pioneer there, you have to look back and be proud of, hey, we took 10 guys around a table with no mechanization and modernization, and we took some major steps toward what you see today with Golden, Fanatics, Collect, Heritage, all these things. I mean, you're a pioneer there.
Well, it was also self-preservation too. I could see the handwriting on the wall that Bill Mastro wasn't going to be needed anymore if you wanted to buy a Wagner card, because it would make more sense. Look, when you've spent your lifetime collecting, when you go to get rid of your collection, you don't want Bill Mastro coming to your house and offering you 50 or 60% on the dollar. And not only do you want to get a good price for your stuff, but you'd also like to roll the dice a little bit and maybe take a chance that there's a few maxi home runs. Okay. And that's what the auctions do. They feed into the psychology, not just of collecting, but of the upside of things. Look, I use auctions. Okay. I created the auction, Mastro auctions. It was Mastro and Steinbach. I did it with Don Steinbach. We started it in 96. I had a vision of what I wanted. I wanted a full color catalog. I wanted detailed historical write-ups. Steinbach died a year later. There I was left with this auction house, $1 million in debt. And it was a nightmare for me. I mean, you want to talk about a devastating time. And then it was, look, do we go damn the torpedoes full speed ahead and really, really go full bore, or do I just can it and walk away from it? And I kind of felt like I felt like it was a good idea, and that it was good for the hobby. I really felt like it wasn't so much. Most of the auction business for me has been more ego driven than monetary driven. I mean, most people can't even understand that I didn't make the kind of money they think I made running auctions. But boy, I sure love the art of the deal. And
it's funny with Leaf and making cards. I mean, I did everything before that. My resume is not what we're talking about today, but like with Leaf, I love making cards. And in the early years, we didn't make that much money. We're making $1 million a year, $2 million a year. And again, listen, for a lot of people, that's like, holy cow, it's life-changing money. But when you have all the capital and all the effort and you're working 80 hours a week and you have 20 people, 30, 40, 50 people, like a couple $1 million a year is not a lot of money for an enterprise of the size. And then we got parabolic, in the late 2010s when COVID and all these other things happened. And we went from a company that made a couple $1 million to $25 million in profit on $100 million in sales. And it's like, it was not about the money, clearly, because I weathered 10 years of making $1 million or $2 million, which is still good, but like it was a lot. It was very challenging to make that. I mean, we kill ourselves to make $1 million or $2 million. So it was never about the money. The money is a great side benefit when it works out, but it was about, and again, a lot of people volunteer that it's my ego that helped do it, because I have a tendency to be a little ego driven or cocky, whatever, just because I've learned in life. My dad taught me, the one thing he did teach me is, if you're not confident, people will walk all over you. If you're doing it, you're doing it with everything you got. You're in it to win it, and you're not going to lose.
How can a person be as successful in any business or industry and not have a fairly large ego?
The great quarterbacks have a swagger.
Yeah, I mean,
they're not quiet. They're leaders. They have a swagger. They have a larger than life to them. And there's something, and Michael Jordan in basketball, even LeBron, these guys have a larger than life element. And I'm not saying I'm either of those guys to the hobby by any means, or you either. We're not in the same class as those cats. I know you're a Jordan fan, but like, still, they have to have that confidence and swagger. And so the same way you wanted to do this, because first off, it's an accomplishment. Like, you did something special in a hobby you care about deeply. And if you make money and you make good money, that's great too. But your drive was the same drive you had when you were trying to buy cards. You were trying to do something a little different. Then you started middlemaning deals where other guys weren't even buying and selling hardly. They wanted to buy too. They didn't want to sell. You're middlemaning deals. So you're staying ahead of the curve. You realize that what you're doing can become obsolete. So you pivot, which I preach about all the time when I public speak in the hobby. I said that when Fanatics came in, you got to pivot, because the hobby's going to change in ways you don't even know yet. You've got to prepare for the next step, but do it before everybody else does, because once everyone else does, it's too late. And so you've done a good job of that at all these steps. You create an incredible auction house. I'm going to skip forward a little bit, back actually, because we can talk more in a future show about the auction business and how, the things that go with that. A lot of people have heard stories about what went with that. That's not important today. What I really want to talk to you about the most, besides the fact I know your story already and I love you, but the card. Because the card is, I will say, and again, the card being that, for people who don't know, the Honus Wagner T206, the finest graded copy. PSA card 000001, the original graded card that the entire grading foundation, the entire business of grading cards was built on. The most recognizable sports memorabilia item in history. People who don't collect cards still talk about the Honus Wagner card. They talk about 2 cards from my experience, 3 cards, the Mantle rookie, the Wagner, and the Jordan rookie. People who don't know cards know those 3 cards, but the Wagner being the one. The grail, the holy grail, as your friend at Sotheby's put it. And I think, and again, I'm not trying to build it up too much, because it really is. I think it's the greatest story of the hobby that has never been completely accurately told by the one who can provide a firsthand account. Every version we've heard, and listen, the card as a book was entertaining. I am pretty confident it's not 1,000% historically accurate, or even a high percentage. And it was entertaining. And that's our account of the stories we've had. But we've heard the stories through that, and we've heard it through word of mouth. But we've never heard the horse tell us the first time you touched that card, what it looked like, what it was, how it became what it was, which is the part people or sensationalists want to hear, like how it became what we've seen today, and then what happened afterward and the impact it had on you and all those things. So this is the part where I do something very rare and I shut up. And this is all you now. I want you to, in free prose, be the great storyteller you are, and then I'll follow up with questions at the end. I don't know how to take myself off the screen, or I would. So I'm just going to hold my mouth and shut up, which is very hard. Go ahead. I want you to tell the story as you've always wanted to tell it. Have you ever told this story like in a big public way?
Oh, not anywhere publicly. I mean, people knew. I mean, even back in '86 when I got the card, I never hid the fact that what I did. I mean, I really didn't. People try to make it out to be like I purposefully did something deceitful. I didn't do anything deceitful. I think what's important there's this. First of all, the history of the Honus Wagner card, not just the card, but the fact that how did it become the Mona Lisa? How did it become the upside down airplane? How did it become that? Well, I think some collectors, not a lot of them, know who Jefferson Burdick was. Jefferson Burdick, if Alexander Cartwright was the founder of the father of baseball, Jefferson Burdick was the father of card collecting, not just baseball card collecting, but card collecting. Jefferson Burdick spent his entire life collecting cards, and he had a vision for his card collection that he wanted it to be in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. So he saw cards the way you and I see cards. They were little mini masterpieces, all kinds of cards from all over the world. And he amassed millions and millions and millions of cards. But he also felt that it was important at some point to catalog them in some way, as best he could without checklists, so to speak. But he put together the American card catalog. And the first one was produced, I believe, in 1939. And the last one was printed in, I think, 1960. And he would update it as he went along, as he came across new sets, new cards. And of course, today we know that if you end in 1960, there's nothing after that. But there's lots of things he discovered as he went along and added them to the catalog. The Wagner card, very early on, was listed as the most, in the appendix in the back of the catalog, as the most valuable card. Yes, it was a baseball card, but it was also the most valuable card. And I don't remember what he first put it in there as. It might have been $50 or something, which was more than all.
I have to interrupt and ask a question. So do you think his decision, what do you think drove that decision? Because it's part of one of the most important sets of all time. It's got it's got some incredible turn of the century players in it. And there are definitely guys like Cobb and Cy Young that are arguably much more important outside.
I don't know what drove his decision.
So
let me ask you something, okay? You've been all over the world, I'm sure. You've seen the Mona Lisa. Why would the Mona Lisa be the most famous artwork? I think it's the ugliest thing in the world.
Hey, trust me. I've seen worse. But this sounds like a bar chatting over a beer. I've seen worse, but it's not a size that is magnificent. And I've seen things in museums where I look and I sit there for hours.
Oh my gosh, you're like, it overwhelms you. But somewhere along the line,
to it once someone points it out.
Okay,
it's fascinating. It's a snapshot of a woman who's not particularly extraordinary in any way, shape, or form, except it captures an essence of like normal.
Somebody decided somewhere along the line that was the artwork in the whole world that should captivate the whole world.
So you're saying you believe Jefferson Burdick is the person.
He decided the Wagner card was the card.
And what year was that, would you think, that he started?
Back in the 30s. Yep.
in the 30s, in the 1930s.
Yes.
He decided that was the card.
He decided that was the card. He, in his, whatever his knowledge was or whatever his information was, he decided that was the card.
Did he? And he never publicly came out and said, "This is why I think that's the card."
Not that I know of.
These stories about tobacco and these stories about none of that stuff had anything to do with it.
We know today that's all.
It's the Philippines.
That's ridiculous. Okay, you know, Honus Wagner. You know, there's a 1948 leaf card.
48 leaf.
Tobacco.
I have that card. I bought it for that reason.
Now, it wouldn't surprise me if he wasn't paid for his use on the image. Sure. But that, I don't think that was. I don't think we'll ever.
The collector thinks that's the story. It's so short because they pulled it from production because.
I don't think we'll ever know. Okay,
no,
we're never going to know. That fact is probably never going to come to light.
But to me, anyone watching this, it was worth the hour so far to hear that card. There was a point in time where that card was anointed, like the Mona Lisa, like the pick your asset, the upside down airplane, as the ultimate in its space.
Yes, and
the 1930s. Nobody watching this knew that it was the 1930s. I will guarantee it. Everybody thought this was sometime in the 80s or 90s or when it became a PSA. You know, they all think it's that point where it became iconic. They have no clue that it was 60 years before that it was anointed. And that to me is fascinating, and it adds an aura to the card. Like, did he know something we didn't know? Or did we just all buy into it after the fact? Kind of interesting. But
well, I mean, God knows nobody knew more about cards than Jefferson Burdick. I mean, he was for decades mailing cases and cases of cards to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and he spent untold amounts of time in the museum mounting his cards. You know, when they were all worth nothing. Okay, he mounted them in these huge albums. He literally glued them into the albums. Okay, the Wagner card that he had was glued into an album.
Right? Truly archived. They're truly archived.
Yes, everything was
like archived photography. You put them into the binder, and you know.
And then he got done.
Back then, it was different.
He got done in, I don't know, 59 or whatever, and he left the museum, and he died shortly afterwards. His life's work was done. Okay, that was Burdick's life's work, was to collect cards, not just baseball cards, postcards, trade cards, all kinds of cards from all over the world, and catalog them and leave it in albums in the museum. And you can by appointment, you can go and see the Burdick collection. You can't see it all because you have to tell them exactly what you want to see. But there's thousands of albums that he spent his life cataloging and putting together.
Well, that's my next hobby trip. I'm just letting you know now. I want to see some piece of that collection because honestly, Dr. Beckett was one of my mentors, and his contribution was substantial in terms of the widespreading of this information. And as a kid, I always thought Dr. Beckett was the guy until I heard of Jefferson Burdick. And I heard about him in 1988 or 89. And then I realized, oh my God, my hero is still my hero. But he's one of my heroes because of what he did making it mainstream. But holy cow, the idea that we can, that there was someone before that 50 or 60 years predating him who did the legwork when it was not for the money. It was not for the glory. It was for the love of it. That to me is mind blowing. So I'm going to quit talking. I told you in this interview I would quit talking.
So
I'm done. So continue. I just want to say that was so important what you just said because almost no one knows how the card generally became the card.
Yeah, I mean, think of it like this, okay? In I think it was 69 or 70, the card was supposedly worth about $250. Okay, so it really wasn't worth a lot of money, but I mean, that was a lot of money for any card, considering nothing had any value.
For sure.
The beauty of a guy like Beckett, who I think the guy's a great guy. He's one of those personalities in our hobby who's just an extremely likable human being. He's been likable since I
Now he
was.
just digs through quarter boxes at a show,
Yeah,
and he
he's
puts
just
he and sells them for
he's
$1.99.
just such a likable, humble guy. I mean, you'd
It's
never
amazing.
realize that he created this empire down there, you know. But his price guides helped revolutionize the hobby, and I'm glad he's one of your heroes. You know, we should all have heroes. Frank Nagy was always my hero. So okay, so let's so we now know the Wagner card.
How it's got its moniker of.
Now it's got its moniker. Everybody in the hobby thinks it's the card. You know, it's the thing. And so I'm at. I bought and sold. I don't know how many Wagners over the years. My grandmother found a Wagner card for me. She lived on Staten Island. She called me one day. I think it was like in the early 70s. She calls me up and she goes, "Oh, Billy," she goes, I found a Honus Wagner card for you. And I go, "Come on, Grandma," you know. And she had a cigar box and the Wagner card was in there. My grandmother, my old grandmother.
You should have had her outsourcing deals. Holy cow.
She was unbelievable. So, you know, you never know. You never know where they're going to come from. And, but of course, back then it was worth about $500 or $1,000. It wasn't worth a lot of money. And of course, I sold it. I sold them all. And but if you fast forward to 1986, so I'm at the Philadelphia convention, and a guy named Jay Zimmerman from Long Island, a guy I knew real well. He comes running up to me and he goes, Bill, Bob Sebchuk, who has a store on Long Island, he has a Honus Wagner card. It's in mint condition. And he has sent me down here to approach you, Lou Lipset, and Barry Halper to buy the card if you want it. It's $25,000. And I go, "It's mint condition." And he goes, "Yes, it's mint condition." He tells me it's mint. And I said, "Wow, I said, "Okay, I'll take it." I said, "Have you contacted Halper or Lipset yet?" "No." "Okay, don't bother. It's over." I said, "Give me Sebchuk's number. I'm going to call him. And when I get done with the show here on Sunday, Rob Lifson and I are going to drive up to Long Island, and I'm going to give him the money in cash and pick up the card." He goes, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "You say it's mint? I'm in. It's mine. I own it." And so Lifson and I did everything back then. We were attached to the hip. We don't talk anymore. You know, that's another story. But we drove all the way to Long Island with the idea of buying this mint condition Honus Wagner card. And so we get there and I call Sebchuk on the phone and he says, no. He goes, just you come in, no one else to the store. Well, I said, "Well, Rob, you have to wait here, you know, in the car." And I go inside and there's Sebchuk standing there with another guy, okay, who I don't know, and I'm not introduced to him. And there's a pile of cards on the counter. They're all T206s. And he goes, "Here it is." And he shows me the Wagner card. And the card, it looks like a football. It's huge. It's got giant curved, but whoever, and I'm looking at the cards, I can realize that this collection in front of me was once an uncut sheet that someone has cut up. And because they knew the Wagner card was valuable, they cut it with huge bowed borders. Okay.
So much that you saw the next card?
Well, no, you could see the cards were all hand cut, and there was a pile of them.
When you say huge, you're talking about like maybe they're a half inch too big overall, or
there was obviously it was he had gone into the borders of the card next to
okay,
it.
good. That's what I was curious.
It was huge. It was very, very large, but the borders were like oval almost.
So he probably destroyed cards in the process of cutting out the Wagner.
I don't know. Okay, there was no additional card on either side. The top and bottom were fairly straight, hand cut, but the sides were jumbo.
I mean, most people haven't seen a Wagner uncut sheet. Is he in the middle of the sheet?
I don't know.
Oh, he had to have been if the borders were, if it was cut on all four sides, because if it was at the top or the bottom of the sheet.
Well, they were all, yes, no, they were definitely all.
So he probably was in the middle of a sheet somewhere.
Well, yeah. So now I'm looking at
My Wagner experience later because I'd never seen a sheet. I had only seen the little strip that was in
the
house,
strip. Yeah.
which was like 5 or 6 cards on the strip,
Yeah.
and it was in the middle of the strip, which tells me there were cards on the side for sure because I saw the strip.
This sheet, I looked at it and I said to Sevchuk, I said, you got to be kidding me. I said, this pile I'm standing here with was an uncut sheet and someone cut it up? And he goes, oh, I don't know anything about that. Now, I'm looking at the guy next to him, and I know that's the guy that cut the sheet up. And
well,
I know
to be politically nice and not say,
I know that's the guy who owns the card, okay? But I don't say anything.
Looking back, thank God he cut it too big and not too small.
Well, yeah, thank God. But it was obvious he knew. He didn't know that there was a plank on the sheet, too. He didn't know that the plank was valuable, and that was too small, okay? So I'm looking at it and I go, Bob, I said, this is not a mint condition Wagner. Look at this thing. What is this? And I go, I'm not paying $25,000 for this.
No way. It's an atrocity as it sits right now.
I'm not even sure what I love it because the colors are so bright and it's just, and I want it, but I'm thinking, what do I do here? So I said, Bob, I gotta hold on. I run out to the car because Lifson and I did all these deals together. So we're buying it together and he's not allowed in the store. Okay. So right. I go, listen, they still want $25,000. These cards are cut off an uncut sheet and the Wagner card is humongous. It's cut like a football. I don't know what to do. I said, how about I tell them I'll give them $25,000 for all the cards. There's a plank in there, which is too small. I said, we'll do that. I said, what do you think of that? And he goes, well, you saw him. Do whatever you're going to do. We'll do whatever. So I run back in. I go, here's the deal. I'll give you $25,000 for all the cards that are here. And I don't know how many there were. There were more than 100.
And some important keys were there, obviously.
No, plank was in there.
Yeah.
But it was beautiful.
If people think the Wagner is the most overrated card, that might be the most underrated card in the hobby is the plank.
Well, I mean, it begs the question if maybe plank is as rare as Wagner. Maybe they really should be equal in value. They're both Hall of Famers, but that's beside the point. We can't recreate history, and I can't.
Harding did not anoint that one, so
yeah, and I can't recreate the sheet. The sheet is gone. Okay, so I said, and of course I had to give him the money in cash, and he goes. Those were the days. Remember the days when everything was done in cash? How crazy it was. So I go, I'll buy them all for $25,000. That's it. And let me tell you, I was gonna leave. If he said no, I was leaving. Okay.
Well, you had to because you were buying something that, like, in its current shape, is nothing like you've seen because it's not.
It was a stretch. Let me tell you, it was a stretch. Okay, but I loved it. So he goes.
It's a lesson for people today. I can't tell you how many deals that I was a stupid ass and walked away from over $100 when someone was trying to get that extra little bit, and I walked away from something magnificent, something special that I would never buy again because I was a penny wise and a pound foolish, the old expression says. And I just sometimes when you see something you know is right to own, buy, collect, keep, whatever your vision for it is, whether it's reselling or not, you just have to pay. And this is an example where you really were prepared to walk, but looking back, thank God you didn't have to, because that would have been the greatest story never told had you not been there.
$25,000.
That's a lot of money.
Was a ton.
What had the most expensive Wagner
that was
sold
a ton
for
of money.
Like, what did the most expensive Wagner sold for?
$25,011. I bought one in the early 80s from Lou Lipset in an auction. $25,000, and
it was a normal-sized card that was nice, and
yes, and that was considered the best Wagner.
Would that have been like in the world of PSA grading? I don't know if that ever made it into a slab. Is that a 5 or a 6?
It probably, by today's standards, 5 back then would have been
6.
When they started grading, probably a 6. It's definitely the second best card. That's the one that's in Cooperstown right now.
Okay, very good.
Okay, so here's what happened. So I get the cards, I give him the money.
He takes the 25. He hesitate about the 25 and hum and haw.
Yeah.
I found a sucker who will buy this football shape.
No. The two of them had to go in the back and talk about it. And he came out and he said, okay, give me the money, and he was not, neither one of them were happy about it.
They weren't dancing and slapping five. They found a sucker. They legitimately didn't want to sell it for
I don't know about that. I mean, Sevchuk Harvard, I don't even know. I haven't talked to Sevchuk in a long time. I think he's harbored resentments his whole life over it.
Maybe.
I don't know why. I mean, but anyway.
If you harbored resentments over everything you sold, well, I used to own one of the PSA 10 Wilt Chamberlains that I bought for $4,000 and sold for $6,000. It's worth millions now. A fourth one just came out. It's worth millions.
What's the good thing about that story?
What's
the good thing about that story? You don't need the money.
Well, I know, fortunately, but I could have resentment for the guy that was so much smarter than me to pay $6,000.
He wasn't smarter than you. You were just doing deals. You were doing deals.
I was 22 years old.
Yeah.
I did not know what I didn't know.
$6,000 was a lot of money.
To me, the whole hobby could go belly up at any time and not survive anymore. And I was playing hot potato. I was trading like these guys with the Pelican cases with cards that never should have been traded like Pelican case cards. They should have been treated like artwork and something special, which they are. And I didn't have the vision yet to know that. And now today, if I get my hands on something special, you will not pry it from my cold, dead hands. I don't care what the price is. You can offer me 3x market value. It's irreplaceable. You're not getting it.
But the reason for that is
if it's replaceable. I will sometimes sell it and gamble I can replace it. But if it's a true one-of-a-kind, irreplaceable, something truly special, you will not get that from me. Because, again, you could offer to double my net worth. I probably wouldn't even do it then. Because if something means something to me, it's a principled. You're not getting it from my cold, dead hands.
Yeah, but
my net worth, I definitely would. But still,
the key to that is that you're pretty well off, and you know what? The money isn't as important to you as it used to be, and that was look. If I always joke with John Ramirez. I love John Ramirez. We've known each other since we were kids. He's got one of the finest card collections, maybe the finest in the whole world ever put together. His whole life is baseball cards. He has everything. Okay. That's what he's got. Okay. He's never gotten rid of anything. All right. And I joke with him all the time. It makes him mad. I say, you've still got your old black and white TV from when you were a kid, because all he ever spent his money on was baseball cards. And I could have a collection like that too, but I spent my money on kids going to college and cars and vacations, and so
my net worth when I sold that chair, my net worth was like $40,000. So like making $2,000 on that was a 5% increase in my net worth. Like think about that. I mean, really, that's pretty staggering. Maybe I was worth $100,000, but still, that was a 2% increase in my net worth flipping that card. There's no way I was holding that for 30 years.
Yeah.
There's no way I was holding it. And I look back and I'm like, but again, these are the lessons we have to learn from these. Are sometimes your vision has to be bigger than what everyone around you tells you your vision has to be. If you know you're right, and then your premise and your premise and the premise for why you did something is true and is right, people will try to sway you from your premise. And if you know you're right, you're right.
Yeah, it doesn't make
you wrong. If you're wrong, you're wrong. But like the biggest mistakes in my life from a business transactional standpoint were knowing I was right and either being scared out of a position or talked out of a position or made to feel like I was being overconfident, like my premise was wrong. And I look back and I'm like, so I hope people take that from your story as a little side note is when you know something's right, it's right. And don't walk for a few dollars. If you really need or want to own something, just pay. Because the regret is a lot more than that $100 or $200 or $500 sometimes.
Well, that $25,000 was a lot of money then.
I'm sure. Oh, God.
And so I gathered up the cards after I paid for them. I got in the car with Lifson, and he was driving, and I showed him the card, and he goes, "Oh my gosh!" He goes, "Look at this thing," and I said, "Oh, it's magnificent. I mean, but what do you do with it? So we had the card.
It's funny how it can be magnificent and unusual at the same time.
And an elephant. It was an elephant. It was an elephant man, and we put it on the dashboard. Okay. We plopped it up on the dashboard as we're driving down the Long Island Expressway. And
Thank God you didn't stop quickly, or else we might have been dealing with a PSA 5 here.
We're both looking at it, and I go, you know, I said, it's so huge. I think I could straighten the borders, and it would still be one of the biggest Wagner cards in the hobby. And he goes, oh my gosh, you know, goes, you would do that? I said, oh, I love it. I said, I just love it. I said, look, I know we own it together. We own all these cards together. Is there any way I can end up with this card? He says, what are you talking about? You already own the best Wagner card in the hobby. Why do you need another one? I said, well, maybe we could do something with my Wagner, because we do something with my Wagner card and we make some money on that, and then I end up with this card. I said, let's think about it, you know. So, because I wanted to get the card home. So I get the card home, and we sold all the other cards to Charlie Conlon, including the plank card, for like $5,000. All of them, the whole pile.
That hurts too. Oh my God.
Isn't that amazing? $5,000, including the plank card. Okay. And so, so I've got it on my desk, and I'm looking at it for days, and I'm going, and I'm putting like straight edges on the sides, you know, and I'm looking and I'm thinking, man, this thing is just, this should be mint, you know? And I'm thinking, you know, I don't know if I can cut it. I don't know if I have it in me to do it, you know? And you have to remember something. There was no ill intent here. I wanted it for me. I wasn't going to do anything to it to deceive anyone.
Well, there was no grading company.
No, there were no grading companies.
And honestly, the father of modern trade, or the father of the trading card category, pasted all his cards in a flipping book. So like the idea of straight out of the pack condition only was just not really what it was. So people wanted nice copies, obviously, that weren't aesthetically pleasing. And I guess putting them in the book, they were still aesthetically pleasing. But that's consistent with the card. It's about it being aesthetically pleasing.
It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that that we shouldn't be able to cut up uncut sheets. It does not make sense. If the card is the right size, trimming implies that you've made the card smaller than its intended size. Now, I get it. T206s are all different sizes. Okay, there's no uniform size. There's no uniform size. And well, here, I'll give you an idea. Okay, so I call Lifson up and I said, listen, here's what I want to do. I want the card. Let's sell my card. My card will become ours. Let's sell it to Barry Halper for $30,000. Okay, and I'll keep this card. And he said, "What are you going to do with it?" I said, "Well, I'm gonna cut it. I'm gonna straighten the board."
What does he say right then? What's his first reaction?
He goes to me. He goes, "Well, you sure you want to do that?" I said, "Look, I think it'll come out looking absolutely gorgeous, and I want it. I want it for me." And I said, I'm going to keep it. And he goes, okay. He goes, so he calls Halper. Halper buys my card for $30,000. And I get the cutting board out, and I've got it on my desk. And I had the phone.
When you say cutting board, is this like a paper cutter like we know today?
An old paper cutter. Yeah, I still have it. Yeah, I still have it.
And by the way, if you ever,
I know.
I told Bill before this, and many times, that if that thing ever leaves your possession, this is an example of what I'm telling you guys who are watching this. If there's something you want desperately, you pay whatever it takes. And I've told Bill, and I'll make the donation to charity or give him money. I want the paper cutter because honestly, to me, it's the second most important relic in the history of the hobby behind the card, because it's iconic to me because I think it's part of a story. It's like when you hear Eddie Goodell's story. There's so many great things about the story, but like things that are critical.
It doesn't look like much. I mean, it's just.
But guess what? Neither does the Mona Lisa.
Yeah.
So we've been there. Okay, I'm interrupting you. So you say I want to cut this thing because I want to.
So so I have the card.
No grading. There's no grading companies.
No. So I have
people look at the card in its pure form. What is it? What does it look like? Is it about the right size? When someone buys a card, that's what they're looking for, right?
I just don't think anyone in their right mind would have left it the way it was. It really was.
It's like if someone took a Hostess cupcake sheet, you know, the Hostess cards,
Yeah, sure.
or postcards and cut them past the perforations. Someone might have further cut them to the perforations because that's where it should have been cut the first time. And so is that really an alteration? Like, I don't know. Like, this is
I don't feel like it is. Okay. So, all right. So I get Lifson on the phone. He's on the phone and he's listening. And I said, okay, I'm going to cut the card now. He goes, oh my God. He goes, why am I on the phone? I said, I want you to hear it.
Oh my God. I'd be freaking out.
Yeah. So I cut the two borders. Okay. Just the two side borders. Do you know that if you show that card to most people, they think that I cut the top and bottom. And let me tell you something. I was tempted to make them straighter, but I didn't, because I didn't want the card to be too small. And if you take that T206 Wagner card and you get all the Wagner cards in the hobby and you put them all end to end from largest to smallest, it's one of the biggest. It's absolutely one of the biggest.
To give people some color here, when Beckett grading first started, they would grade cards that were sheet cut.
Yep.
And their critical mistake was they didn't label the slab sheet cut.
Well, PSA did too, but they just didn't know it.
They just didn't know it. But Beckett knew it. But I was in a hotel room in Addison, Texas, with the biggest cutter of sheets. I won't say his name because he's not really in the hobby anymore, but he's been somewhat famous / infamous. And this guy bought 100 sheets of 85 tops, and with a paper cutter, cut every McGuire out. And I looked at them and I was like, hold on. These are all too big. And he says, and that's how sheet cut cards get put in slabs, because no one ever makes cards larger when they alter them. They make them smaller.
Yep.
And so he cut them all too big, and they all would end up in the slab because they were too big. They weren't minimum size requirement or whatever terms they use. In contrast, it might should have been maximum, exceeds maximum size. But it was just, this has been around forever. And the fact is, there's been a great discussion forever of if a machine cuts a sheet or a person cuts a sheet, the card was intended to not be sold on the sheet. It was never intended for sale in that way.
Well, I always found it offensive when people would talk to me about trimming the Wagner card, because I never felt that way. And you have to remember something. I wanted that card for myself. I got rid of the best Wagner card in the hobby to keep that card for myself. But that was when I had paid $25,000 for it. A year later, somebody comes along and offers me $100,000. I'm like, wow, that's insane. Okay. And you know, for that year, when people looked at the card, no one thought anything of it. I never, I didn't hide the fact that it was from an uncut sheet.
The buyer never looked and said, hey, where did this come from? I want to know the whole history of the card.
We never went into it. He I brought it out to California, and he looked at it. He loved it. Greg Buzino loved it. I loved it. I still love it. Whether it was in a PSA holder or not, okay, never, because you have to remember, PSA didn't exist. So it was just a gorgeous Wagner card, the most gorgeous Wagner card. And interestingly, I was out in San Luis Obispo, and I called the Mercedes-Benz dealership from the airport and said to the dealer, I said, hey, listen, do you still have that 560 SL, the sports car, the little red sports car? And I went from the airport to the dealership and bought a car, and still had lots of money left over from a Wagner card, which, I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but I've always, you know what, the values of this stuff have always perplexed me. I've never quite been able to get my hands around the intense values of the stuff. And yet,
and it comes from someone who loves the stuff.
I do love the stuff.
And you still have trouble getting your arms around.
Oh, I do.
The intrinsic value.
If something
the intrinsic value we put on these things.
If something becomes hugely valuable, money-wise, I have to catch myself not to look at it every time and see $100 bills.
So when you see a Victor Wembanyama card sell for $1 million, or a LeBron or something, you're ready to just
yeah, to me it's crazy. But you know what? I mean, how crazy can it be? I've been wrong so many times about values. Who knows? And
if you haven't been wrong a whole lot of times, either you're lying or you haven't pondered enough.
Hey,
you haven't presented enough opinions about things.
For a guy that sold everything he ever got his hands on, I've done pretty well for myself. I think.
You have it. That's great. So okay, so you decide you're going to cut the card.
Yeah.
Rob's on the phone.
Yeah.
He's cringing because
Yeah.
he hears the.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, this
Yeah.
guy is.
Yeah.
Cutting. And again, I don't know how common it was for people to make sure the card measured with the right size. But like,
I think it was back then more of a visual thing.
Yeah, you just want it to be appealing. But again, I think you painstakingly made sure it was the right size, correct?
Oh, I was. That's what kept me from doing
the distinction. That's a distinction
in the top and bottom board.
I think that's a distinction that people have to understand. And now we see with grading, the companies, their primary concern, and yes, they'll see things that they don't like where it looks like a sheet cut, they won't put it in a slab for whatever reason. But there was a time where they really were like, the card just needs to measure correctly. Now, the nefarious in the industry, now what they do is they will flatten the card.
They crush them. Yeah.
And make it too big.
Yeah.
So that they can cut it down and it measures. And I've talked to people at the grading companies who are like, it's amazing.
Yeah.
These guys, every card they send us is perfect. It measures correctly. And we don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you're making a pizza and you want to size it perfectly, do you spread out the dough to exactly the size you want it to be, or do you make it bigger and then cut around? Or a cookie? You have to have more dough there than the cookie cutter is so that it's correct. And I think that's what they're doing is they're spreading the dough to cut it. The fact is, it's a more nefarious process, or I say a nefarious process, when someone flattens the card to cut it, rather they take it in the state they inherited and correctly size it. It's almost like fixing a car. You fix something that was not done correctly. And again, this is a tough one because some people say, Brian, you're wrong. This is altering a card for the purpose of, increasing the value from what it really is. But I don't know. So kind of fill in the blanks here. Like, you were nervous at first, but then you said, hey, I'm cutting it to the correct size. I do not want it to be the wrong size. I want it to be like the card was supposed to be in the first place.
And I wanted it for me.
You didn't color it. Yeah, you didn't color it. You didn't do all this stuff that's designed to make it look like something it's not. You just wanted the card to be the size it was supposed to be.
And it's I mean, you've seen the card.
Yeah.
It's just the most magnificent item in the hobby.
And you're going to keep it.
That was my intention.
If you look at the hobby now, people care more about eye appeal than the grade in many cases.
They do.
And I've always said that when I buy a 52 mantle, the best one I'm ever going to own is probably going to be an authentic altered copy. Because I'm going to buy an authentic altered that looks like a 7 or an 8.
Yep.
Because I would rather have that in my collection, authentic altered, than a 1 or a 2 that's wrinkled so bad that Mickey looks like they pictured him yesterday on the card. He's in the grave. And that's how he looks now. That's what some of these mantle rookies look like. And I understand people who are purists, but I would rather have an authentic altered copy that is just stunning and presents the art the way it was intended to be presented. And so now people are more accepting of that. So you would think that we've evolved a little bit from the brainwashing of, whatever's supposed to be right, they say, or not, to we care about eye appeal. So that's where you were back then. You cared about eye appeal. So continue the story. So you cut,
I just
stopped crying on the line, and are you like, I got it right the first time, it's perfect? You did
absolutely. Yep. And I never wavered from the fact that I thought it was the most spectacular thing that I ever saw. And I still feel that way. And, I'm not, look, I don't have $50 million to spend on a baseball card, but, when that card, if it ever gets sold, which it probably will, at least not in our lifetimes, maybe, that card is going to be, that card's going to set world records. And it's not going to set world records, or people are not going to shy away from it because they know the story of what Bill Mastro did. They're going to look at the card and they're going to say, that's the most magnificent item in the entire hobby.
But I got to be honest, I think the story enhances the value. It's almost like Pete Rose. I was close with him when he was alive. And Pete, although he was pissed he didn't get in the Hall of Fame, he made way more money in his lifetime not making the Hall of Fame than he would have had he made it. Because if he'd made it, all the money he made the last 20 years of his life, he would have made. He always made lots of money because he was controversial and this and that and this. I think the story of this card adds to the value of the card. I think if another PSA 8 came out tomorrow, yes, it would still sell for a lot. But I think the story on the card, there's a value there. There's an ownership legacy, with the McNall Gretzky, with Ken, there's So many people, I mean, it's just, the card's got a great legacy to it. So, and again, I don't want to get too caught up in the details, but when you cut it, was it slice, finished? Or was it slice? Okay, I think it's an important distinction because one is making a correction, controversial maybe, but I think there's an argument for returning it to the original. To not even return it, to just cut it the way it should have been cut the first time is one thing. Sitting there and trimming it down again and again and again, like to fine tune it.
I didn't need to. I mean, my cutting board is an older cutting board with a kind of a rough cut edge to it. And all I needed to do was make one cut on each side. One cut. Yeah.
Hopefully Colin's family or someone reached out to you and said, hey, do you still have that cutter? We got a plank and some other stuff. We need plank.
It's funny because I probably, with that cutting board, because of the way it is, I probably could cut anything, and it would. I mean, because it gives you a rough cut.
And we never talked about this, but did you ever have other situations where you felt like you needed to make a card look like it was originally designed to look, or was this truly a one-off circumstance?
No, this was definitely a unique circumstance for that kind of situation. I abhor the stuff that's been going on in the hobby with the trimming and the coloring and the squashing and I guess, hey, look, here's my attitude. And I had this discussion with the government when they were questioning me. If the card had a crease and the crease was taken out, and you can't tell that the crease was taken out, where's the damn issue? Okay.
That's a great question, because now, and again, I like the guys at CGC, the comic side. I work with the card side, but they actually will press your comic book. You send them a comic book that's wrinkled, and before they grade it, they will actually press out the wrinkles. The grading company will take the wrinkles out before they book. So
that's great. Why
it is. And honestly, I'm an advocate. If PSA ever hired me as a consultant, which I can't because I have another gig now, but I would tell PSA, I believe you should have a different grading scale for cards that you believe are altered. And I think, honestly, a card that's been trimmed should still be graded. And I think it should be AA9, AA8, AA7, which basically grades the eye appeal of a card that has been altered or restored. And I don't want to just say altered. I'll say restored. Because there are cards that have staining that I think in as a clean card would have more value to someone from an eye appeal standpoint than it's just being a relic in its condition.
But again, if you cannot detect the alteration, okay, in any way, shape, or form, is it altered?
Well, if it's altered probably. But I think that's the question we really have to ask ourselves is, why are trading cards the only asset class where an alteration we think spoils something instead of
preserving
it? If you have a 57 Chevy where the carburetor has been replaced with a modern version, you just sell a 57 Chevy with a modern, and someone pays a little bit less, but it's still a 57 Chevy.
Right.
The fundamentals of that car didn't change.
In all these museums in the world, the vast majority of the artifacts, including especially the artworks, have some degree of restoration or preservation. Okay,
these paintings from the 1200s or 1000, they're not existing in their perfect form without any level of alteration, preservation, or restoration.
I was at Sotheby's for years. I was always a night owl. I would work because you couldn't get any work done there during the day. I'd go in at 3, 4 in the afternoon. I'd work all night. I'd be the only one in the building with the security guards. And who else? The restorers. The building was full of restorers, working on things. I'd order pizzas and everybody be in my office eating pizzas. Okay. I mean, it's crazy to think that these things don't deserve some kind of respect in terms of, don't get me wrong. I think there's certain places I just don't want to go, but I don't really, I'll never, no one will ever convince me that what I did with that Wagner card was wrong in any way, shape, or form.
And you never had a legal problem on the Wagner card?
No, I never. No,
Never. That's misconception.
that was always a marquee thing. It was a promo thing for the government. It had nothing to do with my case. Nothing.
Because fundamentally, whether you agree or disagree about the purity of the card at that stage, legally it doesn't change anything. I mean, there was no fraud. It's not like you sold it and said, hey, this card is exactly as it came out of the pack, yada, yada, yada. It was what it was. You looked at it, you could measure it, you could do everything you want to do to it. You could have taken it to a forensic paper examiner if such a thing existed then and had them look at it. You could have done anything. So I don't think it was fraud in that sense. And that's the problem is with the narrative that's out there. People act like this was like the most grievous act in the history of the hobby when it's not even remotely close. Hell, that store where they killed the store owner is 50 billion times worse than anything we're talking about here. Yet people act like this is the most egregious incident in the history of the hobby. It's just, I've always struggled, even before I became friends with you, I've struggled to have that perception of it. I don't understand. And I'm a purist and I'm a completist and I'm all these things from the old school.
But there's always naysayers. You know that there are people.
Very vocal, the vocal minority, I like to call it.
Definitely. Yeah.
And so I think so let me ask you a dumb question. So, and again, I'm going to skip some of the stuff like then he sold it to McNall. We know a lot of that story, how it went. When you've read the card, right? The book, did you read it?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay, so when you read it,
can I just interject something there?
Yeah.
Okay. Michael O'Keefe is the least objective human being in the world in regards to me. He came to my office, okay, and under the guise of interviewing me on a story for the hobby. And when I realized that he was going to write some horrible things about the card, I threw him out. I gave him a choice. I said, you can go out the front door or I can throw you through the plate glass window. I said, I've had enough of you. Get out of my office. And ever since then, okay, he's written the most egregious articles about master auctions, about me. So the card, the book, there's so many inaccuracies in it. So many mistruths, so many people making conjectures and surmising things about what happened. You know what? It was a tremendous work of fiction that I think people really enjoyed reading, but certainly Michael O'Keefe should not get any credit for being objective and being truthful. You're
reading this thing and you're like, son of a bitch.
Oh, it was.
What's wrong with this guy?
I had a publisher's pre-printing copy of it. Okay, and my brother's a huge lawyer in New York, and I said, listen, I want to just bury this guy. I said, this guy's horrible. And, there really was nothing I could do about it. You can't, we live in a free society. You could say anything you want to about people. But that book's ridiculous. It's a total work of fiction. Absolutely.
And the problem is, I think the greatest story never properly told was told in a way that people have accepted that as the fact because it was the only story out there. Which is why when we talk, and again, we've been friends for.
He did write a book, okay?
Yeah, we've been friends the last couple of years, and we only talked about the idea of telling this story for the first time at the National. And I was scared you were going to punch me because I was like, so many people, and I'm not going to say the names, but there are people in the media in our hobby who, if they called you and asked you the same question, you would know that they're going to have a negative slant. They're going to be an O'Keefe Jr. and they're going to have a negative slant, and they're going to try to look like a hobby hero by bashing on you. And that wasn't my goal. My goal was, I just want to hear the story. I just want to hear, did you sit there and cut the card down and again and again and again until you felt it was perfect no matter what the size was? Was there care to make sure it was in the original condition it was intended to be? Because it was never intended to be a football either. So when it was cut like a football, it was never intended to be like that either. But guess what? It wasn't intended to be an uncut sheet either. In fact, the uncut sheet was
a shame. You got to admit, it was a shame that uncut sheet didn't survive.
Oh my God, what money! But that uncut sheet is probably worth, because the Wagner was truly perfect on the uncut sheet.
But there would be a lot of people who wouldn't want that as an uncut sheet.
Well, and guess what? That's not how it was intended to be distributed. No more than the football was intended to be distributed.
Yeah.
In fact, if I wanted to justify what you did, I would say you're the only person in the food chain that distributed the card in the way it was supposed to be distributed. Now, that would be obviously defending my friend to a point of nausea, maybe. But my point is,
you're not objective either, Brian.
I'm not objective. I'm not objective. Here's the thing. I'm objective in people wanting to know the truth because they deserve to know the truth because I don't know if they deserve to know the truth. I want them to know the truth because this has become the greatest story in the history of the hobby.
A lot of people don't care. A lot of people don't care about the truth.
You know what though? And I'll say those people, all they care about is a card and a PSA or Beckett or CGC or whoever, SGC slab. They're just treating this as commodities. It's 2.4K, 4.9K, 3.6K, $800, 1.2K. That's all. It's all numbers. They don't care about the people on the cards half the time. Most of the people who are buying and selling huge, big cards, I know people that really don't care. They just want to know the value.
Yeah, they want the number. Yeah,
they want the number, and not just the number on the slab, but the number price wise, and that's what drives them.
Well,
and
I did a podcast a few years ago. You know, Rick Probstein and I have been friends for quite a while, and I did a podcast with him. But the interesting thing about his podcast, I don't know if it's still like that, is underneath the screen, underneath my picture, people can be typing in comments. Okay. There was.
I bet they roasted you like a Thanksgiving.
Vile, okay, the stuff.
Well, and I'm being honest. I recorded this instead of streaming it live, and I'm not editing the footage based on what I've heard. I thought about editing. There've been a couple of times where your video went kind of quirky for a minute, but I don't want to edit at all. I want it to be pure, and I'll tell you why. Because first off, I think you represented your position properly. I think people needed to hear the horse say what he said without any alterations, cuts, or otherwise. But I also didn't want people in the comments distracting from the message.
It was tough to do that interview with the comments on.
It is. I've done it too, where the guys say, "Hey, Brian, one less cheeseburger and 3 more workouts." I say, "I can lose weight, but you can't lose jerk." You know, or I say, "Look at the scoreboard," which is the cocky way. I really shouldn't say that because that's of wealth, whatever. But I think at the end of the day, I want people to listen to this. I don't want them to comment. I don't want them to type. I don't want them to make jokes. I want them to listen. And if they come away and their decision is that's crooked, then listen, they're going to think that. If one person comes away and says, you know what? I heard Bill Mastro was the devil. I heard he was Satan incarnate. I heard this guy's the worst guy to ever be in the hobby. If one person comes away and says, that's the Bill Mastro Brian got to know after all the things that are controversial. The card should not be the controversy. There are things that you're probably not tickled about. Less angelic things in our lives that we do. There are. That's not the card, in my opinion. As your friend and as an outsider looking on. And I hope that people will take a second and say, okay, maybe I didn't know Bill Mastro after all. Maybe I didn't realize the love this guy has for the hobby, that he was a purist. This was not intended to deceive or to slide through PSA. You know, it was a different time and a different thing. It was something that wasn't an issue at the time. And I just want people to come away. And I think, again, you say some people don't care. Yeah, they don't, because all they care about is shiny shit. All they care about is, you know, the latest Chase autograph card that comes one every 288 packs. They wouldn't know a quality vintage card if it hit them over the head in a hurricane. But I hope someone comes away from this and says, maybe we let people tell us a story that just wasn't the story. Maybe we assume this guy was something he's not because someone told us he was. And trust me, my whole career, people have gone on Twitter and other places and said, this guy's a cocky SOB. He's a this, he's a that. And you'd be shocked how many people, when they hear me talk in person, I win them over because they realize it's not about me. Yes, I made money and I was successful. Those are all great. And I can be a little arrogant at times. Usually when someone pokes at me, I'll poke them back. But for the most part, I do this because I love it. I love cards. I love autographs. I love chasing autographs. I love concert-worn memorabilia, things that capture a moment in time. That's why I did this. I didn't do it to get rich. In 1987, when I bought my first case of cards at Sam's for $200 of 87 Donruss, and I opened it and sold all the cards for $300, there was no expectation of ever getting rich. That $100 paid for going out 2 times with a girl in high school.
Your first cards were 87 Donruss?
That's the first time as a dealer that I bought quantity to open. My first card.
That's a pretty sad story.
I bought 83 Topps, Fleer, and Donruss. Mainly Topps because Fleer and Donruss were much harder to get. But I bought 83 first. That was my first stuff, and I played baseball with them on the floor. That was my gang when I was 10 years old, whatever. I did that. Probably too old at 10 to still be doing that, but I was. And then in 87, I bought my first cases, and I realized I'd opened the Beckett price guide, and the cards that came out of the box added up to $68, and the box cost 10. And I was like, I was a math guy, and I was like, we have a market inefficiency here. People are willing to pay full price for 80% of the cards. The cards add up to 60. If I open the box for 10 and put in the labor to sort them, I can pretty much sell almost all the cards and get $35 or $40 a box out. And the problem is, after a year or two of that, people figured out that there's an inefficiency that doesn't work, and that arbitrage shrunk to nothing and went inverse. Where then you open the $10 box, you got 7. But for a while it was wrong. And so we figured out that opportunity, and that's how I got started. But I think the whole point being, people are misunderstood because they listen to what people say. Stories are mistold because a third party who was not there tells you what they believe happened and presents it as fact. And I'm hopeful that discussions like this will keep some people who are hesitant to share their story, will make them willing to share it, because I truly believe that people can listen to something and come away with it without the preconceived notions, with an honest reassessment. And I don't want them to think either of us are perfect, because we're not. And we'll talk about that in the future, maybe, where we've done things where like, hey, in retrospect, that wasn't a great idea. But the fact that you stand by the Wagner and what went down with that, I respect the fact that you believe that with all your heart. And in historical context, I can't condemn you for it. You can make an argument that 6 is a better card if you really don't like the fact that it was cut from the sheet, not by a machine. But that's a different argument than the 8 is a fraud. That's a very different argument. And I'm not buying the 8 is a fraud. I'm not buying it. And I'm not just saying it because you're my friend. That card's never been a fraud.
If I could own one item in the hobby, that would be the item I'd want to own.
It is the most beautiful collectible, because of Jefferson Burdick, which I just learned today, and his holy grail status he placed on it. It's special forever. I don't care if it was whatever. It's special forever. And so again, I appreciate you taking time to talk about the process. The aftermath, we could stay here for 3 more hours and talk about the aftermath. Comments like the ones you faced with the Rick Probstein thing. I'm sorry that people in the hobby are like that. And I'll be honest, every day people send me messages on Twitter and say, I'm sorry people come after you, Brian. They apologize for idiots. They apologize for it. They say, I don't know why this guy's being an asshole. And I'm like, you don't have to apologize, because guess what? I don't care. I'll argue with them for sport because I know I can argue them under the table. But at the end of the day, what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. And I can sleep at night with all my hobby decisions. And if you can, that's what matters.
Well, most people, I've attended the national convention the last 4 years. I started going back, and I really am grateful to the way people have treated me, because I stayed away from the hobby for a long time, and I really didn't know what to expect. And I think for the most part, most people treated me very kindly. And I really appreciate that, because I really do enjoy the hobby. I enjoy collecting more than anything, not really dealing anymore. And like I said, we all have this collector bug. I think it's in our genes, and I certainly have never gotten rid of mine, and I don't think you're ever going to get rid of yours. It makes us passionate. No one's ever said about me, and they'll never say it about you, that we're average. Okay. I never wanted anybody to say that I'm average. I don't mind being viewed. Look, anybody who's got some technicolor to their life, there's always going to be people that are going to be naysayers. It's okay. I have
I'm still learning this. I'm still learning, because it does occasionally make me want to rip their heads off. But
I buy a lot of things on eBay, and I occasionally get a few absolute whack jobs on eBay that make comments to me, they're very hurtful, or they're meant to be hurtful. And I'd like to say that I'm like Teflon and it all just rolls off me, but it doesn't sometimes.
No, I hope people are more sensitive to the fact that, until they have walked the path of pure righteousness and they have a glass house that is untarnished, keep the rocks to yourself. And I think that's something people generally with social media and trollism and all the things that can happen, that doesn't stop. But I want to leave the same way I built you up when we came in about how important I think you and the story are to the hobby. I'm going to say something. I was talking to a good friend of mine who's also pretty well known in the hobby. And one of the projects I'm undertaking is a trading sports card Hall of Fame. There's one coming for cards, but I want to do the people behind it. And I'm just going to say this because I want you to hear it from me that, I mean, I'm voting for you for the Hall of Fame when it comes time. And again, whether it's first ballot, second ballot, because there are so many people that need to go in there. Burdick, James Beckett, Larry Fritz. There's so many people who need to go in there. But I think your impact on the hobby is profound. Mistakes? Absolutely. Sure. Don't know for sure that the Wagner is one of them. That's one that's up for discussion. And I think your conviction that what you did is right, that's enough for me to say that's not a deal killer for me. I'm not going to ignore your hobby impact because of that story or that narrative. I'm not going to let that determine my vision of your impact, because your impact is not Mastro Auctions. Yes, it's an impact. That wasn't your legacy. You were in the early years of the hobby, the formative time of what we enjoy today, and you had an impact in that time that, again, when you ignore that, the same guy that says we should put Pete Rose in the Baseball Hall of Fame might argue that you shouldn't be. And I'm going to punch that guy, because to me, that's the most, that is the most, and Pete was my friend, you're my friend, but that's the most idiotic opposites I've ever heard. You have to believe both or neither, in my opinion. And I'm going to say that I make you a baseball card Hall of Famer if I have a choice. Maybe second ballot, because there's so many deserving people. I like to think like a fifth or sixth ballot, maybe if I'm lucky. Most people hate me, so I may not even make it at all. I'll be a voter, so I'll vote for myself. I'll get at least one vote. But no, I just want you to know that I think your contribution needs to be recognized. Then people can form their own opinions about the card or, what transpired later. They can make their own opinions about those things, but don't ignore the contribution, because I think it's significant. So I've just bowed down and said I think you are an incredible influencer on the hobby, and it means a lot to me that you helped pave the way so that I could do something I've loved my whole life. And I say the same thing every time I go to Dr. Beckett's house for a meal, because I've been pleasure of being there for dinner. Whenever I've sat with different people who influenced me strongly in the past, every one of them, I said thanks for paving the way, because my dream wouldn't have happened without guys who had balls, doing big things, sometimes taking the punch for it, but having the balls to do it and stand by the fact that they have a love for this. It's not just for the money. And that's always been my thing too. So thank you. I appreciate you telling the story, because I think people need to hear that. I skipped ahead of some of the stuff at the end, because I think the story about like what McNolman paid for it, I think that's all pretty accurate. I think Ken owning it and saying he's never going to sell it, no, or the Diamondbacks, that's probably true. But what got us there? Like the dashboard of the car, I can't imagine driving in that car. I'd be scared I'd hit the brakes too quick and be on the floor. And I'd step on it when I'm trying to hit the brake or the pedal or something. I'd be petrified. The best illustration is hearing him on the phone while you're cutting. I mean, oh my God. I would have been like freaking out. Because again, 25 grand back then was a shitload of money.
Yeah.
But again, I hold you in high regard. Let people make their decisions, but I hate when people make decisions without hearing from the horse.
Thanks, Brian.
So thank you, Mr. Ed. The horse has told the story.
Thank you very much.
From him. And again, there'll be a day someday where it's time to talk about other things, but for now, it's perfect.
Happy to do it. I don't have any problem talking about anything. I really don't.
People have forgotten about the card. Some people never even knew about the card, or they've heard the story and they just took it at face value. Now you know. Now you can make an informed decision. But I'll tell you, the hobby is a better place with that Jose Canseco super collector, that Ricky Henderson super collector, the guys who are type collectors who have one of every card, Lou Lipson or whoever that has all these cards. It's a better place with all these personalities and all these people who are passionate. Whether you disagree with one piece or two pieces or no pieces, it's a better place with all of them. So I'm glad you're there. I'll walk alongside you. So there you go. All right, guys, that's what I got for you today. Bill, thank you so much for joining me. I think hopefully we achieve what we tried to achieve today. I wanted people to hear you talk, because so far all they know is what they've heard. And I don't think that's fair. Even if you still decide you don't like Bill, that's okay. You probably don't like me either. And I can live with that also. I got a few friends too, so it'll work out. But I think at least hearing people talk and giving them a chance to explain or give their position. We want people to hear our position when we got one, so why not hear? Bill, thanks, my friend.
Yeah.
I appreciate you, and I'll see you soon, my friend.
See you, buddy.
Guys, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I wanted to keep it at a couple hours. That's why we cut it a little bit shorter. But I got to be honest, Bill, I love hearing him talk because of his passion for the hobby. And listen, I know there's going to be people out there who are not 100% sold on, is it okay? Is it not okay? It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, I just want us to form our opinions based on hearing the truth, hearing what someone has to say, and not blindly make them because someone told us to believe something. Guys, it's a pleasure. We'll do this soon again, and maybe I'll have a little surprise for you soon with someone else that you haven't heard from in quite a while. Guys, be good. Talk to you soon.